Can you assure the world that as you try to get control of these areas, you are not going to use military or economic coercion?
No, I can't assure you. You're talking about Panama and Greenland. No, I can't assure you on either of those two. But I can say this, we need them for economic security. The Panama Canal was built for our military.
Recently, in the space of a few days, the man who will be the new president of the United States has raised the possibility of taking control of the Panama Canal, Greenland, and even Canada. He has even suggested, as I'm sure you all know, not ruling out the use of military force in some cases. Not surprisingly, such comments, even if they are in Trump speak, and have to be lowered a few decibels for translation, have set off alarm bells. This has prompted European governments such as France to once again call other nations to be very wary of the United States and to protect themselves.
There is no question of the EU letting other nations in the world attack its sovereign borders, whoever they are.
Basically, France and other countries are openly assessing the possibility of the United States violating their borders. If we were told this a few months ago, we'd think it was a joke. Now, does Trump really intend to buy or even invade Greenland or Panama? And is he really going to try to annex Canada? Well, let's see, not so fast. I've already told you that in order to understand this whole story, we have to turn the dial down a little. It's evident that the way Trump has chosen to announce his interest in these three territories is scandalous, histrionic, and shameful. Very much true to his usual form.
They should give it up because we need it for national security. That's for the free world. I'm talking about protecting the free world.
Let me stress again, you have to know how to interpret Trump. You already know that he's a guy who generally doesn't arouse much enthusiasm in us, but we don't believe he's a real pyromaniac either. So no, don't worry, it's unlikely he has any interest in going to war with any of these three territories. But then what on earth is Trump hoping for with all this fuss? Why is he getting so carried away with Canada, Greenland, and Panama? Well, if we forget for a moment his controversial and reprehensible words, the truth is that Trump's team has a certain logic in proposing a greater US role in these three territories. Therefore, the question is it really as crazy as it seems? Well, we're going to tell you all this and more throughout today's video. We're going to explain exactly what the new Trump doctrine consists of. So without further ado, let's get started.
Invading Panama.
Did you know that until not so many years ago, the United States totally controlled the Panama Canal? Yes, in fact, the canal was built between 1904 and 1914 in exchange for maintaining sovereignty rights over the canal strip itself. Let's just say it was a masterful move by then-President Theodore Roosevelt. It was a time when the United States was beginning to control the world. First, because it was the only country that could do it, without the competition it has today from other powers such as China. And secondly, because there was an ambition for the whole planet to play by American rules, particularly as far as global trade was concerned. Well, the fact is that the canal was returned to Panama in 1999, and since then, the Americans no longer control it. The Panamanians do. But now, all of a sudden, Roosevelt's ambition to control the canal seems to be reincarnating itself with Trump. The question is, why? Well, let's take a look. Pay attention for a moment to these words of Trump.
Look, the Panama Canal is vital to our country. It's being operated by China. And we gave the Panama Canal to Panama. We didn't give it to China. And they've abused it. They've abused that gift.
According to the new US president, some kind of US intervention in the canal is necessary because right now it is controlled by China. The question is this true? Well, I think we all know that Trump is a genius of exaggeration and marketing spin. Saying that China controls the canal does not exactly match the current reality. And of course, to raise economic sanctions or even a military intervention for that matter is truly outrageous. But pay attention because there is some truth in all that. Take a look.
Panama has become the first Latin American country to sign on to Beijing's vast Belt and Road Investment Initiative. China has particular interest in Panama because of its location between the Pacific and Atlantic.
It is true that Beijing has been showing more and more interest in the canal. And you may be wondering, how? Well, mainly by investing in infrastructure around this enormous infrastructure. For example, Chinese companies such as the Land Bridge Group or even Hong Kong's C.K. Hutchinson Holdings operate the ports of Balboa and Cristobal, each at either end of the canal. Of course, wait a minute, because what Trump does not say is that the bidding for the contracts to operate those ports was done in 1997. That is, before the complete transfer of the canal to Panama by the United States. The concessions were granted through a bidding process in which the best bid won. An ironic, small detail that the future president forgets for some reason. And naturally, CK Hutchinson Holdings, while being a Hong Kong company, is a respectable one with a lot of assets around the world and no signs of collaborating with Beijing. And that's not all. Trump also forgets that in 2016, China's Land Bridge Group won a contract to build a huge container port in the Panamanian town of Isla Margarita. However, due to breaches of contract, Panama cancelled the agreement, and now the Italian companies TIL and MSC will build and operate the port for $1.2 billion US. You know, it's those little details that you forget when you threaten other countries with tariffs and even military intervention. Anyway, Trump stuff. Now, wait a minute. By this, we don't mean that China doesn't have any presence in these places. What is certain is that since 2018, there are more and more Chinese companies involved in the logistics, electrical, and construction sectors in Panama.
For instance, a contract has been awarded to a Chinese consortium for $1.4 billion to build the fourth bridge across the canal, and the Shanghai Gorges Group has also been awarded the construction of a gas-fired power plant for some $900 million. But all in all, beyond normal trade relations, the China story doesn't go much further.
VisualPolitik community, whether you find it more or less problematic that there are Chinese companies investing in the canal environment, the reality is that for now, it doesn't go beyond that. Trump has gone so far as to insinuate that Chinese soldiers control the canal, or that Panama is charging crazy transit fees to US ships to pass from one side to the other. But yes, both claims are completely false. The first because, no, there is no Chinese military controlling the canal. And the second because while the canal fees have indeed gone up, they have gone up for everyone due to the drought of 2023. That is to say, there is no detrimental deal targeting the United States. The Panamanians are not giving discounts to the Chinese while ripping off Americans for crossing the canal. That is false. What's more, the United States continues to be the king in terms of origin and destination of cargo passing through the canal, and by a long way. And naturally, if companies or the US government do not agree with the tariffs, they can always look for alternatives. That's the market. Even in Washington, they could try to negotiate a different general agreement. I give you this, you lower the rates, or you let my military ships through at a reduced rate. Basically, that's the market. But then why is Trump coming out with this whole story? Well, let's see. It's true that Trump's idea that China is controlling the Panama Canal is based on absolutely nothing. It's simply false. But it is true that the Chinese are showing increasing interest and have been investing in Panama, in and around the canal, and even establishing banks there for years. And it stands to reason that this could become a concern for the United States. So Trump's intention may simply be to draw attention to it and thus encourage the Panamanian government to remember whose side it has to be on. Or perhaps also to obtain better conditions from the Panamanian government and thus score a political win. But it doesn't seem to go much further than that. Sorry, but there just doesn't seem to be a whole lot to this story. But guess what? Where the fuss really reaches its peak is with the Greenland issue. In this second scenario, the United States has every reason to keep an eye on the issue and to try to gain influence. Why? Well, that is exactly what we're going to tell you next.
Make the Arctic great again.
Overnight, Trump has surprised us all with a crazy idea: buying Greenland. Although Denmark, the country that controls the territory, has made it clear that the island is not for sale, Trump has said that either they will sell it to him, or he will slap savage tariffs on the Danes, going so far as to not rule out military intervention on the Arctic island. VisualPolitik community, once again, the way this issue is being addressed is unbecoming of a US president, and someone who is just a few days away from his inauguration. Threatening economic punishments without even ruling out war against a NATO ally is insane, even for Donald Trump. But if this is so, then he must have a good reason to say that, right? Well, in this case, the truth is that there are indeed reasons for one of the priorities of the United States to be to increase US presence in Greenland in the coming years, especially in the northern part of Greenland, in its most Arctic zone. Of course, Trump could have said it this way, and there would have been no controversy. But you know how he is. Instead, he has chosen the most flamboyant and blatant formula he could think of. But Greenland will never be a full state of the United States. Why not? Because neither is Puerto Rico. They aren't going to give 2 senators to 50,000 Greenlanders. But back to the important thing. If the facts are anything to go by, Greenland is going to play an absolutely key role in the Arctic, an area that is destined to be the scene of major commercial and, who knows, possibly military disputes in the near future. Why? Well, we've already told you on other occasions, because with the retreat of the Arctic ice in recent years, the North Pole is becoming an increasingly attractive route for maritime trade. We're talking about what seems to be the trade route of the future that could greatly shorten transport times from Europe and the United States to Asia, and thus reduce freight costs. Savings in time and distance could reach 40% for some routes. For this reason, controlling this area is becoming a priority for the Arctic powers. A small group of countries consisting of the United States, Denmark, Canada, Norway, Finland, Iceland, and of course, Russia. Well, Trump seems to be convinced that the United States must expand its zone of direct control in the Arctic, which is currently limited to Alaska. For what purpose? Well, to be able to block, if necessary, the passage of ships from certain countries. The US presence would be a way to increase its deterrent force.
I'm talking about protecting the free world. You don't even need binoculars. You look outside, you have China ships all over the place. You have Russian ships all over the place.
In other words, the passages through Greenland's area of influence would be a sort of Panama Canal, but natural and much colder. In fact, the cases of Greenland and Panama appear to be interconnected. It seems that Trump's intention in his new presidency is precisely to increase Washington's control over the planet's major trade routes. And as I told you, as far as the Arctic is concerned, both Russia and China have been preparing for years to use this route and to control it completely. To give you an idea, Moscow has built about 450 military stations in the area, even stationing long-range fighter jets, anti-ship and anti-missile batteries. And that's not all. For its part, in 2018, Beijing announced the Polar Silk Road, a strategy that envisages a lot of investments in logistics infrastructure in Russia's Arctic zone, and also money to boost the Yamal LNG project, through which gas would be extracted in the Arctic area and transported with icebreakers throughout the year. VisualPolitik community, both Xi Jinping and Vladimir Putin know that gaining ground in the Arctic is a matter of life and death. And so, here is one thing that Trump is right about. The United States has to strengthen its presence in this region, because it is best able to defend the interests of Western countries. In fact, this has not really been spelled out, but in his controversial statement, Trump does talk about defending free countries. What's more, in the wake of the war in Ukraine, several NATO countries have begun to assess their weaknesses, and the Arctic is precisely one of them. But, along with these strategic trade routes, Greenland also has other goodies that Trump would surely love to get his hands on. Check it out. What you are seeing on the screen is the location of known deposits of rare earths in Greenland. And I say known because no one knows what could be found beyond the coastal areas. Greenland is a land rich in minerals such as neodymium, dysprosium, praseodymium, elements that are key to manufacturing high-power magnets, electric vehicles, and wind turbines. If the United States were able to control and exploit these resources on a large scale, it could greatly improve its strategic position, since China currently controls the rare earths market with around 80% of global production. Don't think it's easy to make use of anything in this place though. The ice complicates everything a lot, but that's another matter. The point is that if we add both elements, the Arctic route and rare earths, conceptually, Trump's idea is not bad.
US lobbied Greenland rare earths developer Tanbreeze not to sell to China.
Of course, the problem is that you can't come in like a bull in a china shop, talking about buying the island, punishing Denmark, or not ruling out the use of force. But what Trump is likely to do is to try to increase his presence in Greenland in an agreed upon way. In fact, guess what? The Danes have already made a move.
Denmark sent private messages in recent days to President-elect Trump's team expressing willingness to discuss boosting security in Greenland or increasing the US military presence on the island.
Also, the Danish territory may end up becoming independent in the not-too-distant future, as it is something that has been talked about for a long time. But it's crazy to posit that it will become part of the United States. But as I say, what may happen is that Washington may reach an agreement to increase its military presence in northern Greenland, and try to get better conditions to be able to exploit strategic minerals. Now that's a scenario that might be realistic, but anything outside of that, no matter how much Trump says it, seems like hot air. Unless, of course, the Greenlanders want to become a Puerto Rico-style colony. In the end, we're most likely looking at Trump trying to dominate the media and present himself as a strong leader with big talk. It's the perfect model for many of his voters, because make no mistake, in the doctrine of the new president, marketing has almost as much weight as substance. This is the same thing he also seems to be doing with Canada, another of the countries that have been singled out in this nonsense of threats and accusations against countries allied with the United States. Listen up.
And why Canada?
Trump has raised the possibility of making Canada the 51st state. Not Puerto Rico, no way, Canada. The origin of this idea has points in common with that of Greenland, and basically comes down to the fact that Ottawa controls a vast Arctic coastline. But in the Canadian case, what Trump seems to be most interested in is the economic and trade issue. According to the next US president, Canada is dependent on Washington because they are subsidizing it. How? Well, take a look at this graph. In 2024, the United States had a trade deficit with Canada of around $55 billion, a deficit that has grown a lot during the Biden administration compared to previous years, and one that Trump is hoping to exploit as a political bargaining card. Of course, Trump's idea is not at all to invade Canada or to buy the country or anything so outlandish. At the end of the day, the US has much worse trade deficits with China, Mexico, Vietnam, Germany, and Japan, and Trump has never said anything about invading or controlling these countries in any way. Also, when you talk about the trade deficit, you forget something very important. One party receives more money, but the other receives more products that are purchased voluntarily.
The trade relationship between these two countries is very strong. Canada is the largest market for US exports, ahead of Mexico, Europe, and China. Exports such as trucks, vans, cars, and automotive components, and refined petroleum products. The United States is also the main market for Canadian exports, of which crude oil accounts for a quarter, reaching a record 4.3 million barrels per day in 2024. That means, without Canadian oil imports, the United States would have trouble meeting its demand at good prices, and without imports of US refined products, it would be much the same story for Canada.
But then, if there really is a relationship of interdependence and so many mutual commercial interests, why enter into the controversy of annexation and the conversion of Canada into the 51st state? Well, everything indicates that this is yet another Trump attempt to reach trade agreements that are more advantageous for Washington. And if the countries don't come to the party, then I threaten you with 25% tariffs. That's how Trumpist politics works. Nothing new to see here. Well, for that, and also to take a dig at Justin Trudeau. In the end, the two countries will most likely end up sitting down to negotiate new terms on trade in some goods, and Trump will then sell it as a win to his MAGA supporters. And then he will move on to the next country with which he feels like using such strategies of coercion and threats to get the upper hand. The truth, it's not something that should come as a surprise. During his first presidential term, he already did something similar with the European Union and its tariffs, and with South Korea, when he imposed new tariffs on this important Asian ally and blackmailed them to forcefully increase the payments they make to Washington for the US troops stationed there. Let me tell you, the last time our team was in South Korea, they didn't exactly see a lot of glowing support for this president, not even among top military officials. But that's another story. VisualPolitik community, Trump has a very particular way of moving his cards. That's why we are convinced that none of these three territories, neither Canada, Greenland, nor Panama, should fear any invasion or any particularly hostile action by Trump. What we do seem to be seeing is a way of indicating where their priorities will be to strengthen the US position in the region. But even so, let's take a moment, because we can't end this video without making one thing very clear. For us, words are not neutral, and the way things are done or announced are also important, even if they don't end up happening. Listening to Trump, who's going to be president of the United States in a few days, talking about zones of influence, about national security interests, about not ruling out the use of force just because it is convenient for him, reminds us of another character. Any ideas? No? Well.
Очевидные геополитические дивиденды. А для нашей страны это в итоге вопрос жизни и смерти. Вопрос нашего исторического будущего как народа. И это не преувеличение. Это так и есть.
Of course, we aren't comparing the Russian bigwig with Trump, but I'm sure that Putin, hearing Trump speak in the terms he's spoken about Greenland and Panama, must have been amused. By using terms such as national security interest, Trump has given some validity to Putin's stated reasons for invading Ukraine, also for national security. Launching messages like this that can be interpreted as a kind of carte blanche and law of the strongest is very irresponsible. And although we don't believe that it has ever crossed Trump's mind to invade any of these territories or to annex anything to the United States, but we do believe that the manner of presenting everything we've told you about in this video has been very negligent. But in the end, it all seems nothing more than an indication of the kind of foreign policy to come, taking a heavy hand with US allies and offering an outstretched hand to rivals. Nothing too different from what we already saw between 2016 and 2020. But while all that is coming, and with only a few days to go before Trump's inauguration, it's now your turn. What do you you think will end up happening with the territorial annexations that Trump has talked about? Could this kind of messaging motivate China and Russia to increase their regional expansion in defense of their own interests? Well, leave us your thoughts below in the comments, and let's start a debate. And very important, if you like this video, hit the like button and subscribe to VisualPolitik if you haven't already done so. As always, thank you very much for being there, all the best, and I will see you next time.